All right, guys, just wanted to give you kind of an overview of these reports that we're sending your way. Now, one of the things that we're doing is there's actually two separate reports that each candidate has, and what we've done is we actually combine them into one to simplify it a little bit, and we also deleted out probably about 30 pages out of this thing, things that really aren't going to be useful. There is more information in here than you need. I'm not going to cover every single page. There's just a couple of items that we're going to highlight as we go through it. So we start out with each candidate. Again, the cover page. We've got a table of contents in here for each one, just kind of get you through the first half of this report. So as we go through there, we start out roughly page 6 in here is going to be behavioral characteristics. So there's 3 paragraphs in here, and each one kind of focuses on a different area of the individual candidate. So each one of these just gives some general overview information for the candidate itself. Then from there, we go into what are the values to the organization? What are some things that they would bring to the organization? Some strengths, certainly, that they have. Once we go from there, the next couple of pages, you're going to see checklists for communicating. And there's 3 pages that go into this. The first one is this is ways to communicate. So when other people are communicating with this individual, these are things that they will respond really well to. And so these are things that we would want to keep in mind, quite frankly, when we're communicating with them during the interview process. The next page is ways not to communicate. So these are things that when other people do this to this individual, it's like the nails on a chalkboard. Right. So again, it just makes a hair stand up on the back of their neck, and it will tend to make them shut down as they go through it. And then the next page here with the 4 areas: dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. This is really for the candidate themselves. So this is when they are communicating with other people, things that they should do. From there, we've got really the page perceptions, and this is just a quick glance. The first section here is how the candidate sees themselves. And then the other 2 are really going to be interesting for us because one of those is the middle section, under moderate pressure or stress. How do they come across? How do other people see them? And then certainly in the last section in red is under extreme pressure. How will other people see this individual? So many times that can be helpful because the individual doesn't see themselves that way. Again, it's the way other people tend to see them. Absence of a behavior, I wouldn't worry about that too much. When we get to the descriptors, this can be helpful. And the way this page works is the shaded areas are the ones that describes this individual. Now, again, if you're not familiar with it, those 4 categories that are there, dominance is how the individual deals with problems and challenges. Right? And so somebody who's a very strong D is going to tend to be very driving and ambitious and pioneering and strong-willed. Somebody who is a very low D will be, unobtrusive, right? Peaceful, modest, agreeable. They're not going to be an in-your-face kind of person at all. So this one here, you can see venturesome, decisive, really describe this individual. They're not a strong D, but they do have those tendencies. The influencer, that's your people. It's how they deal with other people in contacts. And so this individual, again, tends to be very trusting, optimistic, poised, and convincing. The steadiness area, S, that's how they deal with pace and consistency. So somebody who is a high S wants to focus on one thing at a time and doesn't like to multitask. Somebody who is a low S will multitask all day long. And they're very comfortable with that one. And so, again, it deals with that area of the person. And then last is the compliance. That's how they deal with rules and procedures set by other people. So somebody who's a very high C need to know what the rules are so I know how to play the game. Somebody who's a very low C, I really don't care what your rules are. I've got my own if it makes sense to me, and I'll break those if it makes sense to me. So that's the 4 categories that we have there. Forgive the dogs in the background. They're just having some fun. So next couple of pages then is we have the time wasters. Everybody has things that they do that is natural in their style that just wastes time. And so these are some things that these individuals will tend to do. They come naturally by it. We've got a couple of pages of those in here. And then that's followed up by areas of improvement. What are some things that this individual does that they should really be working on? These are weak spots for their particular style and who they are. So these might be things that we want to ask some questions as we go through it. From there, we've got a couple of pages where it just ranks 12 different behavioral traits. Right now, really what you want to be looking at is their natural style. Pretty much ignore the adapted style all the way through. That's really more reflective of where this individual is today and what they're doing. And so, once they take on a new role, that will change. So it's really the natural style that we want to look at. It ranks these 12 different behavioral traits in order from their strength to their weakness. Now, the way that these work on here is very simply this, and I'll just blow this up a little bit more. So the natural style, the blue bar, is how that individual scores, right? So this one on a scale of 1 to 100 for interaction scores an 80. So that's pretty good. The red underneath it, 68% of the US population falls in that red shaded area. So this individual is actually at the top end of the US population. So this is something that is probably fairly talkative. We're going to notice that in this individual. And then the 58 in the middle, that's the mean score. That's the average for the US population, is where the average person sits. And so just kind of gives you an idea of kind of how they shake out with the rest of the population. So again, it's going to score these 12 different behaviors for this individual, and will basically kind of show us from their strength to their weakness area. And then, so we've got, again, those 12 that we have. This page is just actually giving us their DISC graph. Now, again, disregard the adapted style at this point. That's going to change if once they take a new role. So really, it's the one on the right that's there. And again, if you haven't dealt with the DISC too often prior to this, if they're right at this midline at 50, what that means is that's really a neutral line. So they could take on the tendencies of strong scores, or they could take on the tendencies of the weak scores as the situation it really requires. And if they're within 10 points of that middle, we call that situational. In other words, they could go either way. Once we get outside of that range, like in this case, this candidate, his I score is a 75. That's certainly his strongest score. He's going to be a people person. He likes to be talking with other people. And so he's probably going to stay on that strong side on a regular basis. This one, don't get too wrapped up on this page. It just lays out the same information a little bit differently. So don't worry about that too much. And then we come down to the wheel. Now, this wheel, the way that this thing works is the circle is their natural style. The star is the adapted style. And the closer that circle is to that outside color ring, the harder it is for this individual to understand why other people don't see life the same way he or she does, right? So this one is very much a promoter, right? Likes to be with other people. He just can't understand why other people would be a detail person, right? So that would be something that they would have to struggle with a little bit. So the closer they are to the center, yeah, I can understand why other people have different point of view. I just might not agree with it. So let's keep that one in mind. Then we get into the driving forces. Now, again, the DISC is how they do things. How detailed are they? How talkative are they? How organized are they going to be? That type of thing. And it's what people tend to see. Driving forces are why they do things. This is the fire in their belly. It's what gets them up in the morning. It's what brings them into work each and every day. So again, on the characteristics, we got just a couple of pages of just general information about that individual. It's good general information that we have. Got a couple of quick recaps here on their strengths, and some of the things that energizes them and really stresses them out. Then, you will see at this point their primary driving forces cluster. So that's a page that I would look at. And these are the four, these top four are the ones that really gets them focused. This is, this individual is definitely driven by altruistic, driven to assist other people for the satisfaction of just helping other people and being supportive, right? They're very selfless, they're commanding, and they're receptive. So if they can be in a job that rewards this, they go home at the end of the day and they love their job. So that's where this one comes into play. The situational driving forces doesn't really come into play too much. The indifferent forces, and why I left this one in here is, if we're asking this individual to do things that fall into these categories, that's actually something that would probably turn them off a little bit. Doesn't mean they won't do it, but it might turn them off a little bit. So that's why I left this one in there. And then again, the horizontal graphs, I really could have pulled those out. In fact, I may do that on the final reports that come to you. It's just plotting the same thing a little bit differently. This chart here, again, just gives a little bit more definition to each of those driving forces. So again, the areas that are farthest away from the center, that's the strongest one. So this altruistic is that primary. Again, it's serving other people, compassion and caring. It just gives a little bit more definition to those areas. And so we got a couple of pages of kind of that blended driving forces and motivational, because again, your DISC, your behavioral side is how you do things. The motivational is why you do things. What this area gets into is, again, your driving forces will steer your behaviors. And so this area is just kind of showing how in this individual, the driving forces are steering the behavior. So we got a couple of pages in there. And then we give you what's their ideal environment. If they could pick their environment, that's what it would look like. From a supervisor role, what are some keys to motivating and to managing this individual? What do they want? What do they need? So we've got that information there. And then we talk a little bit about emotional intelligence. And this one here, I certainly am going to look at it. What this does is how in touch with really themselves and their environment is this individual, right? So we look at a couple of different areas. We look at self-awareness. We look at self-regulation. We look at their motivations. Right, so, and those are all internal, and then external, looking at their environment. Again, social awareness, social regulation. How do they control themselves in those various environments? And so that's what the emotional intelligence is really looking at and talking about. So again, we give you some general characteristics about this individual and their emotional intelligence. We've got 2 pages there. And then we just rate those couple of areas. So each one of those on a scale of 1 to 100, how do they score out? So for example, social awareness, the ability to recognize and understand my own moods, emotions, drives, and as well as their effect on other people. Well, this individual, again, same thing. The red shaded area underneath is 68% of the US population. This individual's on the high end of that scale. So they're going to be pretty much in touch with themselves in terms of their moods and their control. And so you can see this individual pretty much all the way down is pretty strong in each of those areas. So certainly in touch with themselves there. And then this just gives a little bit higher level look at the same thing. Overall, what is their total emotional quotient? And then again, overall, how do they see themselves? How do they see others? So pretty strong in those categories. And then again, we've just got some individual information on each of those categories. You can look at it and use it if you need to, but you don't need to spend a boatload of time there. Again, if there's an area that would be low, I'd go in and look at that particular area at that point in time. And then again, just kind of some blending stuff, general information as far as how this is going to tie together for this individual. Then from there, we're going to go into the last section, which is competencies. And I like this section because, behaviors are pretty much what they are. They're not going to change unless the individual goes through some significant life event. Driving forces flat out are what they are. Those are not going to change. Competencies, on the other hand, can be learned. But the problem is it takes time. Right. So if I'm hiring an individual, if they don't have the competencies, number one, they're going to be weak in those roles. And it might take 4 or 5 years for them to learn that stuff. And so, again, we basically look at these. We're ranking all of their competencies. You can see them listed here, for example, leadership, problem solving, self-starting, customer focus, and on down the list. And we're scoring them each on a scale of 1 to 100. Right. So I can see, some of these items, this individual scores out at 100. And then, again, as it gets a little bit weaker, down toward the bottom of that list, you can see the scores start going down a little bit. And then we give a little bit more detail on each of those areas. And really, when it comes to the competencies, I've listed and give you that detail really on all of them. So we have that information. You can kind of see how they score out. And again, same thing, 68% of the US population is in the red shaded area. So it just gives a lot of information about this individual. And then from there, if there's an area that I don't know what that's telling me, you can simply come into these summary pages here that we've given you at the end. And I've given you really the top 9 summaries for this individual candidate's top 9 areas. So a lot of information here. Look at a couple of the high points. Certainly look at their disc graph, look at their perceptions, look at the things that, the ways to and ways not to communicate. Then go into the driving forces and what are their top 4 driving forces. Dig into that one a little bit. And then certainly on the competencies here, what are their top competencies? Do you see any holes or weaknesses there? So hopefully that helps. Again, what I'm going to do is tomorrow I will have all of the candidates. We'll go through their assessments. We'll kind of peel out some of those pages that you guys don't need. And then I will send one report for each individual candidate, and you guys will have those tomorrow. Got any questions? Feel free to reach out to me. I'll be in Syracuse, New York this week, but I will have time certainly tomorrow, Tuesday, and we'll be back in the office, actually coming home Thursday night. We'll be back in the office on Friday. So with that, we'll talk to you then. See you guys.